Welcome back to Kings of Columbus. Doug Lesmerises. Bill Landis and Jeremy Birmingham will join us a bit later. Bill, we're diving in on the game, right? Always time. We could do Ohio State versus Michigan as Kings of Columbus every week, 52 weeks a year, correct?
I think there's probably enough to talk about at this point that we could do that. Yes.
Yeah.
But we'll try to not make this a 5-hour show.
Yeah, no, it's just it'll be a 5-week series of 1-hour shows. So what we're doing is, if you guys watched the show last week, we did an Ohio State Oregon breakdown. Offense versus defense, head coaches against each other, sort of the framework of where the programs are, what we think could happen with those teams this year. And then we liked that. So this week, we're going to do the same kind of thing with Ohio State, Michigan. And the plan is next week to do the same kind of thing with Ohio State, Georgia, which I think Bill is correct of. New Big Ten rival, the rival, national rival. And I think with Nick Saban leaving and with Dabo Swinney,
he's been vanquished. It's fun.
Just deciding he's not going to participate in modern college football. Yeah. Transfer portal. Are those the three teams that at the moment we would use to define and contextualize Ohio State football right now?
Yeah, definitely Michigan and Georgia, I think. And like Oregon is kind of like rising. We have an eye toward them clearly. Yep. I don't know that they've earned that status just yet, but it kind of feels like it's headed that way.
Yeah, but they have fancy uniforms. So
they do have fancy uniforms. Yep.
So we're going to do this Michigan thing, and that means that we had Berm on last week to talk about Ohio State, Oregon recruiting. We're going to have Berm on this week to talk Ohio State, Michigan recruiting. And then at the end, we have some good texture questions and answers. And at the end, the big question was, and a version of this question has existed forever, but I feel like in a 12-team playoff, when Ohio State's on a 3-game losing streak against Michigan, and they are maybe a co-favorite to win the national title, the stakes are raised on this question. Mm-hmm. As an Ohio State fan, would you rather win the national title with a loss to Michigan, which in a 12-team playoff is absolutely possible? Or would you rather beat Michigan? And then the way I phrased the question was, make it to a semifinal or the national championship, have a good playoff run, but just not quite get there, right? What would you rather do? We have the texter answers on that. And then the three of us, because we have to have Berm in that conversation, right? Yeah. Berm's head's going to explode.
Yes. I can't wait to hear what he says.
We're going to answer that at the end. And the three of us will also give what % chance we think Ohio State has to beat Michigan this year. We're going to talk about what the point spread is right now. That's out there, but that's all at the end after the recruiting talk. Bill, what you and I are going to do here at the beginning is sort of break down the basics of Ohio State and Michigan right now. And we also do have tech subscriber answers to help us do that, because the first thing I asked the tech subscribers, Bill, was what is your level of confidence in Ohio State beating Michigan this year on a scale of 1 to 10? 1 is 0 confidence and 10 is supreme confidence. And the answer was 7.85. Off a 3-game losing streak, I think that's a decent amount of Buckeye confidence in this game, isn't it?
That's a lot of Buckeye confidence. And I don't even say that to suggest that I think it's like unfounded or wrong. I'm just a little surprised it's that high. Like I would have maybe thought like in the 6s. Maybe this is closer to 8.
Yeah. Well, so let me get to. I think it's related to this. It makes me curious, like what % of that confidence is in Ohio State retaining so many of its great players, adding Caleb Downs and Will Howard and Jeremiah Smith, guys like that, and what part of that confidence is based on an expected Michigan drop-off. Because another thing I asked the texters is, how much of a drop-off do you think Michigan will have this year based on the coaches they lost and the players they lost? And the choices were a huge drop-off, some drop-off, a small drop-off, and none. Some, which is the second greatest amount, 1 going away, 68%, huge 26%, small 8%, and nobody said none. So when you think about why there's this level of confidence, do you think it's more this, that people think, okay, Michigan had its run, Harbaugh's gone, J.J. McCarthy's gone, Blake Corum is gone, Mike Sainristil's gone, 9 offensive starters are gone. Michigan's not as good as they were last year. That's where the confidence is.
Yeah, I think so. Combined with what you said about Ohio State, right? Like there's chance for this to be like one of the better Ohio State defenses we've seen, even with some offensive turnover. Like you expect the offense, like you expect Ohio State almost to like be Ohio State, and perhaps even a heightened version of Ohio State in the Ryan Day era. Meanwhile, Michigan like lost a ton, right, and including its head coach. So that's why it makes sense to me that you would be reasonably confident in a win. I'm still just slightly surprised it was that confident given how the last 3 years have gone.
Yeah, I thought AJ, one of our texters, made a good point, and obviously we talked so much last year about Michigan's easy schedule, that Michigan got through 2 months, got to 8-0 without really being tested, without anybody really knowing how good Michigan was. That's definitely not the case this year. They have Texas in week 2. They have USC in September. They open with Fresno State, which, if you think App State was a tough challenge, Fresno State has a chance to be among the best group of 5 teams. They're playing a real schedule this year. And AJ said this: I think a piece of what people are forgetting to account for with Michigan is the schedule being tougher. Then that means less time at the start of the season for them to develop. They were able to rotate so much last year because they played a nothing schedule. Guys were able to be fully healthy the whole year, and they had backups that could come in and play with confidence, as they were able to get 30 and 40 snaps at the start of the season. I think OSU put themselves in a bad spot with the Notre Dame home and away series with that timing, that that Ohio State was grinding it out early. Michigan was developing and learning. Do you think that's a component here, that in a world, and we're going to get to the Michigan breakdowns in a second, again, like everybody's gone. They have practically, I think they have 5 starters back on defense and 1 back on offense, that they have to hit the ground running this year. How much of a challenge do you think that's going to be for Michigan?
A big challenge, right? And it's not, it's like navigating that and trying to figure out how to win games. It's less developmental time, as AJ said, right? For all the young players. It was kind of astonishing last year looking at like Michigan snap counts and seeing just how many guys played, like to the point where I think sometimes last year people were like dismissive of Michigan's top end talent because some of the cumulative stats weren't that good because they just didn't play a whole lot. So like I think that is probably off the table this year. And then there's like the physical toll that a schedule like that takes too. Like the road to the game is much more difficult, I think, for Michigan than it is for Ohio State. Now, Ohio State has us to get through Oregon and Penn State before it gets there too, but Michigan's road, I think, is unquestionably much tougher. And that would also factor into my thinking too when I try to think about how that game is going to go, because part of it is like the war of attrition thing, right? Like what kind of state are you in when the game happens? And I think Michigan probably will be a little more beat up when that game comes than Ohio State is.
This is state of the programs. And the choices were Ohio State has a better program, Michigan has a better program, they're even, or Michigan was better before Harbaugh left, but now that Harbaugh's gone, Ohio State is better again. So those were the choices. Not a surprise. And again, it's not just that it's Ohio State fans. You could look at this honestly and think it. Ohio State is better 83%. Basically even 7%. And then I think, 10% chose the interesting answer of, well, it was Michigan, 3 straight Big Ten titles, 3 straight playoff appearances, a national championship. The Harbaugh version of Michigan is better than Ohio State, but this is no longer the Harbaugh version. So now Ohio State's better. So then as a result, right now, it's 93% Ohio State is better, 7% even. And then nobody in Michigan's current state thinks Michigan is better. There's part of this when you answer something like this. This is the neutral field, what you think, versus on the field, the respect that is earned and has been proven. Even with all the stuff that Michigan lost, and even though you would look at recruiting and we're going to and say Ohio State recruits better, there's a part of me that, is it hard to say, oh, it's Ohio State's better after 3 straight losses? Or can you legitimately, from a football standpoint, just say that? I know what happened. Ohio State's better.
I find I struggle with that. I think I might say even, right? Like so, and then it's almost like give Sherrone more like a little bit of time to show whether or not he can handle this, right? Like not just assume that it's not going to be as good. it's probably I don't know, maybe it's a safe assumption, but I think I lean more towards even because of just like what's happened on the field the last 3 years. And I think part of that identity that Jim Harbaugh kind of cultivated over the last three or 4 years remains, even though he's not there. So it's not dissimilar from like Ryan Day taking over for Urban Meyer, right? Like, did people
We're
think
going to
Ohio
talk about
State
that in a
was
second.
much worse off? Yeah.
We're going to talk about Ryan Day and Sherrone more and how many comparisons there are to this. I think I would vote even here as well. And that probably would not surprise our texter Ryan, who says Doug's continued love for scum.
I like that both in the context of this show and also out of context, so people just think you like dirt.
You ever go to a pond and you just take off that top layer and you're just, oh, this is beautiful. Oh, I just love. I don't think it serves anybody to think Michigan stinks like that.
Yeah.
And I think it's possible. So I think people understand this, and people are always interested in what our true viewpoints are. And I'm just trying to talk for 1 second the difference between doing a Kings of Columbus show and a Kings of the North show. Kings of the audience changes, right? It's not that my viewpoint changes, but if I think Michigan is awesome and I'm doing a show only for an Ohio State audience, I'll tell you that I think Michigan's awesome, but I'm not going to say it every 5 minutes, because what's the point? Like, that's not what the audience is here for. But if that's the topic, or if that's a question, I'll give you my honest answer. My answer shouldn't change. But on Kings of the North, that's part of what we're doing. We're contextualizing everybody. So I'll probably say that more often. So my views don't change, but clearly we're in a world now where you and I are doing Kings of the North a lot, and we just talk about Michigan outside of an Ohio State context in a way that we never did before. We had never, did we ever come on? We were just doing an Ohio State show and be like, hey, let's talk about Michigan, Penn State outside of the Ohio State context and what we think. People would turn that off. So the audience changes, but the view doesn't change. So, but the way I express the view may change. So I think the view that I've tried to express with Michigan is they're good. Please understand that. Because walking around thinking, last Saturday in November, all good. Ohio State's got this thing in the bag. Michigan's a fraud. I don't think is good for you if I think that's not true. Yeah. So I said going into spring, I had doubts about Michigan. Coming out of spring, I have fewer doubts about Michigan. Who do I think is a better football team in 2024 right now? I think Ohio State is. I think almost everybody would say that. But I think I would encourage people at the moment to not be entirely dismissive of Michigan. So if that's loving scum, then that's fine.
Yeah.
Is that what? How would you, to this audience? And by the way, these are our people. This is the reason anything else that we're ever doing in our professional lives is possible, is because of Ohio State fans who choose to listen to us two knuckleheads. What would be your context of trying to explain your view of Michigan to Ohio State fans at the moment?
I think a lot of what you just said, right? Like I think they're good. I think they're in a little bit of a transition. The thing that is difficult about this conversation with an Ohio State audience is Michigan cheated. So, like I don't quite know how to like layer that in when talking about Michigan.
That was the thing. I was like, oh, what's the other thing we have to talk about? What's the thing? Something about a horse. Something about a horse. Did Jim Harbaugh ride a horse on a sideline? But there are people on our Kings of the North show who think we hate Michigan because we say and we think that Michigan cheated. So we think Michigan cheated on both shows. We think Michigan's a good football team on both shows. But on this show, people like the Michigan cheated discussion more than they like the Michigan's good discussion.
Yeah, and I think I feel like every point we make on this show should start with like Michigan cheated, but, and then get into it, and then maybe on Kings of the North we pull back a little bit.
It's Michigan's good, but
yeah.
Yeah. And I do think, like, in terms of the cheating, I think it gave them an advantage. in the first two Ohio State wins. I think they gave it an advantage along the line. And then once it stopped last year, they kept winning. So that matters. I think like what they did in the second half of the year while Harbaugh was suspended, beating Ohio State, winning the national title, winning those games, they weren't stealing signals then. So it's a valid point. So let's dig into a little bit of why we think this. I do. It's one of those, sometimes you get like an overwhelming thing. It's like, people are like almost an 8. And then some of the individual people, Pat sent this. I am not feeling good. This is loyal Pat, the Ohio State fan. I saw Dane Brugler's top 25 draft picks. Michigan has 3 in the top 20 and 2 in the top 5. The Buckeyes have only 2 in the top 20. This is looking ahead to the 2025 draft. I think Brugler supports the Buckeyes. Dane is from Ohio, and I think Dane has a little Ohio State blood running through him, and I don't think he would deny that. I think there is enough left at Michigan to carry over the swagger, and the Buckeyes are still going to be going into the game with doubts. I don't know. I'm just not feeling confident about a win. So I do think this is what we can get into now after we do the Ryan Day, Sherrone Moore discussion. Michigan doesn't have the same depth of talent. Michigan has some top-end talent. And when they're talking about it, and I assume what Pat is referring to is Will Johnson at corner and Mason Graham at defensive tackle as potential top 5 picks. And then you still throw in guys like Donovan Edwards and Colston Loveland, who on offensively, who are really good guys. We have to remember that Ohio State has more top-end talent right now. Michigan still has some dudes, though.
Michigan has some dudes, but I if you expand out a mock draft conversation to like the first 3 rounds, Ohio State might have like 14 players and Michigan might still only have those 3.
That is correct.
Yeah.
I've been a little surprised at some of the early mock drafts, which are based on nothing, although Dane's aren't based on nothing. Dane's really good. But some of the Ohio State guys, like, you can get to the 20s in a 2025 mock draft and not find an Ohio State guy. And then it'll be like, hey, 4 of the last 10 picks in the first round are Denzel Burke, Jack Sawyer, JT Tuimoloau, and Emeka Ibuka. You know what I mean? Right. But it's not like they have a bunch of guys in the top 10 with the projections right now.
Yeah, I think if you can get past the people whose mock drafts are just like a regurgitation of recruiting rankings, which, because there are some of them, I saw one where I think like JT Tuimoloau was the number 1 pick, which is like kind of crazy. Wrong. Yeah. So, I don't know. Like, are you going to ask me like right now, next April, is Ohio State going to have a top 10 pick? Like, I would probably say probably not. But I think they're going to have a couple first rounders and like a bunch of top 100 picks.
The big deal right after in the 2016 draft was they had didn't they have 10 guys in the first 3 rounds? I think
in 2016. Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
So, which I think that was a record. So like that's one of those that's real depth of talent, because it can be a little bit of a crapshoot on day 3, rounds 4 through 7.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a second or third round pick, you're still like legitimately a dude that teams are like, we got to get this guy. It's not only about first rounders. So is Ohio State going to set a record for first round picks? No. Are they going to be very well represented in total number of draft picks and a bunch of them in rounds 1, 2, 3? Yes. But don't forget,
and it's also going to be a roster too, like, when we do this math, remember, like, Jeremiah Smith, right, will be a factor in the Ohio State-Michigan game this year, even though he won't be a first-round pick for 3 years.
And Caleb Downs, who can't go in the draft yet.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about Sherrone Moore and Ryan Day. Sherrone Moore was like a week short of his 38th birthday when he took over as the head coach. He turned 38 in February. Ryan Day was 39 years old when he took over for Urban Meyer at Ohio State. Neither of them have been head coaches before. The resumes are pretty similar, except that Ryan Day had that dalliance in the NFL as a quarterback's coach under his mentor, Chip Kelly, with the Eagles and the 49ers. Otherwise, Ryan Day is a Boston College Temple guy, right? Like, full-time jobs in college football before he became the head coach of Ohio State. Before he got to Ohio State as an offensive coordinator, full-time jobs in college football, New Hampshire, Temple, Boston College, and then Temple again, and then Boston College again. But those are the 3 schools. Sherrone Moore, full-time jobs in college football before he got to Michigan. Louisville, Central Michigan, right? So like they didn't pass through Ryan Day was a GA at Florida, but like they weren't co-offensive coordinators at Penn State and Oregon and USC on their way here. And I do think somehow, like if Jim Harbaugh had been in the NFL, if he had gone a little bit earlier, and then Sherrone Moore would have gone with Jim Harbaugh, and then if they hired somebody else, then Sherrone Moore, because now Jim Harbaugh is his guy, he could have been in the NFL too. Just like, why was Ryan Day in the NFL? Because the NFL was knocking down Ryan Day's door, or because his mentor was like, hey, you want to come work in the NFL? So
yeah.
Do you think they're similar qualifications and resumes? Because the part that's similar is they get to Ohio State, Michigan. They are very, very important assistant coaches who are charged with leading the offenses, and they then both get thrown into head coaching situations because the head coaches are suspended. So once they get to the schools, my gosh, it's like how many other people have that situation where, oh, my head coach got suspended, I had to be the head coach, and that helped polish me, right?
Yeah.
That's an incredible comparison. But it feels like top to bottom, other than the NFL stuff, it's kind of the same deal.
It's very similar. I guess the one thing I probably should be more clear on, and I'm not, is because Michigan's offense has like more or less been the same, I think, since Jim Harbaugh got there, but clearly took like a massive step forward the last couple of years, just kind of like really executing on the things that they weren't always so good at early in Jim Harbaugh's tenure. And like I don't know how much credit Sherrone Moore gets for that, right? Like, because Ryan Day got a ton of credit for like bringing an Ohio State passing attack like out of the gutter that was just like terrible, like modernized their passing attack and then made them one of the best passing teams in college football almost every year he's been here. And I'm not saying that Sherrone Moore like didn't do that for Michigan's offensive line play in its run game, because clearly they did take a step forward, but I don't know how much of that was Sherrone Moore and how much of that was just like Jim Harbaugh figuring out stuff.
So when you think about this rise of Michigan, 2021, Josh Gaddis is the offensive coordinator. Josh Gaddis wins the Broyles Award as the best assistant coach in college football. Josh Gaddis is like, I'm the man. I'm going to Miami. And they're like, okay. So then in year two, it's Matt Weiss, the quarterback's coach, and Sherrone Moore, the offensive line coach, who are co-coordinators there, right? And then in 2023, Matt Weiss gets arrested. I guess he did some stuff.
Computer crimes.
Loses his job, and now Sherrone Moore is like fully the offensive coordinator, and then also is like has to be the fill-in head coach at times. So the thing I think is fair is like it is a different path. Whereas like Urban Meyer was like, Ryan Day, come save us, and Ryan Day came in, and yes, Kevin Wilson was there, but they handed Ryan Day the offense. Sherrone Moore wasn't quite that, but Sherrone Moore is intimately involved because he's the offensive line coach. And what is the Michigan offense built on? In 21 and 22, even if he's not the full-time OC, it's built on offensive line play, and the offensive line is great. Yeah. So I think it's pretty close. So I think the bottom line to me is, in the end, should Michigan fans be any less enthused or any more enthused? Should they feel the exact same way about Sherrone Moore taking over? An inexperienced young Sherrone Moore taking over for a successful national championship head coach. Is not the Michigan program and the Michigan fan base basically in the exact same spot where the Ohio State program and the Ohio State fan base were in December 2018?
I think the one difference is Ryan Day inherited more infrastructure from Urban than I think Sherrone Moore is from Jim Harbaugh. Because I think there was a thought
the infrastructure.
Jim Harbaugh took the infrastructure with him to the NFL, and Urban Meyer like didn't take an immediate job. And even if he did, frankly, I don't think he would have taken it with him if he went somewhere else.
I think maybe he tried to take some of the people, but they didn't go.
Yeah, right. That's what I mean. Like I don't think they would have gone to the NFL. And clearly they didn't. So that's the one thing that gives me. It's the one thing that makes me say it's like not an apples to apples thing, right? I think this is. And I don't want it to come off the wrong way, because I'm not trying to like diminish what Ryan Day accomplished earlier in his career, but I do think that whatever happens this year for Michigan will be like a little more about Sherrone Moore maybe than what Ryan Day's first year was about Ryan Day. Does that make sense?
I do. The infrastructure, you're exactly correct. Identity, though, Ryan Day helped. Ryan Day changed the Ohio State identity.
Yes.
It went from this program has never thrown the ball to now this program is defined first and foremost by throwing the ball. This is now a program defined by receivers and quarterbacks. It wasn't that under Woody Hayes. It wasn't that under Jim Tressel. It wasn't that under Urban Meyer. This Michigan, I do think the identity of Michigan, though, I think what Harbaugh finally got right, it took a while, but he actually wound up going back to what he did before, right? Which was that physical play. You throw to the tight end, you run the ball like maniacs, you play good defense. I do think the identity is strong because that's what we've talked about. I mean, the whole story of the Ohio State-Michigan matchup, the rivalry for the past 3 years has been that matchup. That will remain. And I think the infrastructure, but that identity, he doesn't have to figure out how to play. Everybody knows how Michigan plays. And when you watch Michigan this spring, as I said on KOTN, it's like, oh, that's Michigan. You can tell. Oh, it's still Michigan. I think that's very helpful.
Yeah. It's also similar too in like Ryan Day's first year as a head coach. He just happened to have 2 top 5 picks on his defense.
Yes.
And Sherrone Moore is like getting the same.
That's really good too. Jeff Okudah, Chase Young equals Will Johnson, Mason Graham.
Yeah. And Ohio State also had Damon Arnett, who was technically a first round pick.
Yeah.
Although I don't know that he was regarded that way. But that first draft class after Ryan Day's first year had 3 first round picks, a second round pick in J.K. Dobbins, and 3 third round picks in Devon Hamilton, Jonah Jackson, who Ryan Day went and got as a transfer, and Malik Harrison.
Right.
So like that was a very talented. Clearly,
and
Ohio State fans know that.
When you think about it, Ryan Day had Justin Fields and Sherrone Moore has Jack Tuttle. And both their names start with J.
And that is where the similarities begin and end.
Everybody knows, right, that the guy who didn't play in the spring for Michigan, but still might be in the battle to be the starting quarterback is the guy that Ryan Day went to San Diego to scout and said, who is that guy that Jack Tuttle, the quarterback, is throwing to? Oh, it's Chris Olave. And Jack Tuttle since then has gone Utah, Indiana, Michigan, right? Is that correct?
That sounds right. Yeah.
Yeah. And is like, you think about how old Chris Olave is like on his second contract in the NFL, and Jack Tuttle might be Michigan's starting quarterback there. Sure. So that we also understand that, right? Okay. So do you think, but before we leave the Sherrone Moore Ryan Day conversation, the fact that Sherrone Moore got Ryan Day last year head to head, does that matter? Where does that fit into this head coach discussion?
I think it matters. Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course it matters.
So Sherrone Moore has an edge, and it will be interesting. Do you think, true or false, Ryan Day hates Jim Harbaugh?
Truest thing you could ever say.
What do you do when you hate someone? Do you hate people? Do you have a lot of experience with hate?
No, I don't harbor a lot of hate. No.
Yeah. I have a lot of experience.
Yeah.
I've been down this road many times before. What do you do when you hate somebody and they leave and then somebody replaces them and you think, all right, guess I got to hate this guy. Can you hate someone? Will Ryan Day force himself to hate Sherrone Moore? Is there enough of Jim Harbaugh that rubbed off on Sherrone Moore that Ryan Day's like, oh, no, I can hate him. It's fine. Plus, he beat me last year, and he said the F word on TV when he was talking about Jim Harbaugh. Like, I'm good. I can hate him. Or will it be, no, I don't hate an individual now. I just hate that we are losing to Michigan. But I'm not going to focus my energy on the guy at the top of the pyramid. I'm going to focus my energy on win.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know, because I think part of the reason Ryan Day clearly despises Jim Harbaugh is because Jim Harbaugh cheated to get an edge.
Oh yeah, that's that thing again.
But it's not a tremendous leap in logic to just like lump everyone on their staff in with that too, right? So it's just like, you just replace the face and like that head coach is still a cheater, right? So I think he probably strongly dislikes Sherrone Moore.
Yeah. They could do that AI stuff. They can do a deep fake if they need to. They could just put Jim Harbaugh's face on, replace the face, put Jim Harbaugh's face on Sherrone Moore. And they'll be like, oh yeah, no, we hate that guy.
Sherrone Moore hasn't lobbied any personal attacks against Ryan Day yet, though. So
that's true.
At least he has.
I think it might be more instructive to hate hate the program than hate the person.
The entity. Yeah.
I think in the end, maybe like we agree Ryan Day hated Jim Harbaugh, and also Ryan Day lost the last 3 games to Jim Harbaugh. So like hating Jim Harbaugh didn't get him anywhere. You know what I mean? Like maybe
it almost felt like in trying to respond directly to Jim Harbaugh's criticisms, perhaps Ryan Day did not put his best foot forward in the Michigan game, and now maybe that is removed from the equation.
Yeah. Oh man, you got to do a whole hate show. I think people would respond to that. All right, let's talk about football a little bit, and then we'll get back to hate. We'll brush on the football. Just a little brush on the football. All right, let's talk about the Ohio State defense versus the Michigan offense. The matchups here, it's the same thing we did when we talked about Ohio State, Oregon. Ohio State has, for their projected starters, they have 9 returning starters. They have a backup that's stepping up, but frankly, Cody Simon was practically a co-starter with Tommy Eichenberg last year, and they added 1 transfer in Caleb Downs. An incredibly deep and experienced defense. This is shocking, Bill, for the Michigan offense. 1 returning starter, 1 transfer, and then 9 backups stepping up. Like, we have to explain this to people. It's Colston Loveland, who is probably he might be the best tight end in college football now that Brock Bowers is gone, as the returning starter. And they added Josh Preeb he'll be a starting guard as a transfer from Northwestern. Everybody else that is expected to start at Michigan, from Donovan Edwards at running back to their 3 receivers to their 2 offensive tackles to whoever the starting quarterback is, it's probably Alex Orji, but the battle is still on. Their backup stepping up, and this conversation of we think Michigan has been so good with targeted transfer portal acquisition. There's part of me that wants to respect Michigan for doing it old school, and hey, we just got guys ready. They're ready to step up. And there's also part of me that thinks, they didn't target in the portal the way Harbaugh did the last couple of years, and it might hurt them. What do you think when you see 9 backups ready to step up for the Michigan offense?
Yeah, I mean, I feel we're going to have a recruiting conversation in a few minutes with Berm. Like, I'd feel a little better about it if I were Michigan, if the recruiting was a little sharper, I think, than it has been. Like, the high school recruiting for Michigan's been weird, and we'll stick a pin in that. But it's odd. I didn't sense like a whole lot of we got to keep this thing rolling, like kind of urgency, like to go out there and like really add some pieces. Right? They are really leaning on their development and player evaluation, which like I guess has served them well to this point, right? So who's to say it's the wrong way to go about it? It's just a little surprising to me to see a team that now has so much expected of it, is the defending national champions, wants to maintain that standing, and then just kind of went through the offseason without doing much. It's a little like even Ohio State, like Ohio State only added 6 players, right? But there was an aggressive posture when they did that. Michigan just kind of sat there and let the roster turn over.
Yeah, I mean, Miles Hinton, who's probably going to be the left tackle, is a transfer they added last season, but he was a backup. Like when they said they thought they had 7 starting quality offensive linemen, he was one of them, but he wasn't one of the guys who really started. Otherwise, it's a lot of internal stuff. Giovanni El Hadid, who has played for them, is expected to be probably the other guard with Josh Preeb. He's played. But when you think about last year, adding Ladarius Henderson, adding Drake Nugent, like really targeted stuff on the offensive line. And then there's skill guys, Samaj Morgan, Tyler Morris, Freddie Moore. I mean, this is just like running like next man up. They did not go. So when you think about, when we talked about the Ohio State defense versus the Oregon offense, it's like, okay, let's go. We can't wait to see the Ohio State defense versus what we think is going to be a dynamic Oregon offense. Ohio State fans thinking about this might be, I can't wait to see this because I think Michigan might score 4 points against this Ohio State defense if this is what this offense is going to be.
Yeah, I think I'm not especially high on Michigan's offensive prospects this year. Well, and that's honestly, it's mostly because unless they're going to change what they do, the engine of that offense is the offensive line, and I just don't know. Like I don't know that I like to see a Michigan offensive line, right? That we've seen the last couple of years. I guess in hindsight, it's a little interesting now to think about. Like for as big of a reputation as they have for like offensive line development, and that being the thing that is like kind of driving their identity, like they've had to reinforce with transfers like almost every year. So like maybe I don't know, maybe their offensive line development's a little overstated, but this will be the test of that because they only brought in, well, I guess they have 2 transfers on this line, but they're really leaning on what they perceive to be a strong ability to develop up front. So we'll see whether or not that's true.
This is a stark edge for Ohio State in this matchup at the moment. And it's not like we are expecting Caleb Williams to land at Michigan as the starting quarterback in the portal. Like they might add another receiver. I think they've added 2 in the portal, but they said after spring we need to add receivers, and they went and added 2, but they're not better than the 3 guys I named who are in-house guys. So they're going to have a little bit of a ways to go offensively, and that's going to be a huge determining factor. And probably JJ McCarthy never got the respect from opponents while he was there. I'm not even sure Michigan people understood that they had a guy who was a top 10 pick, but they might really miss him this year too.
Yeah.
All right, let's go to the other side of the ball. Michigan defense, Ohio State offense. We understand the Ohio State offense. We understand that they have 5 returning starters, 3 backups are stepping up, 2 transfers, and then freshman Jeremiah Smith moving in. The Michigan defense, 5 returning starters, and they're pretty awesome, the guys who are back. 5 backups stepping up, and again, just 1 transfer. And the thing we have to keep in mind here is Rod Moore at safety, who was one of their bigger returning guys, tore his ACL in the spring's out for the year. So that would be another returning starter that they don't have because he's not there. Mm-hmm. But when you talk about the Michigan returning starters, really experienced on the defensive line, Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham at defensive tackle. Probably the best defensive tackle combo in the country. Derek Moore and Josiah Stewart at edge both have played a ton. Then we talked about Will Johnson at corner is a guy. Makari Page in the secondary is also back. Ernest Hausman at linebacker was a transfer they brought in last year from Nebraska, who was in their linebacker rotation but was a backup last year. And then Jayshon Barham from Maryland is a big-time dude at linebacker. So there is a depth of retention on defense that doesn't exist on offense. And they did, we talked about some targeted people. They're going to lean on this defense. This defense for Michigan should still be pretty good. Probably not as good as last year, but not a huge drop off because they're the top 11 still. There's a lot there.
I think it has a chance to be nearly as good as last year, right? I think they got to the biggest question for me is replacing Mike Sainer still. Yeah. And the guy who was the obvious replacement for him, Keon Sabb, transferred to Alabama. So I don't 100% know what they're going to do exactly there or how good they feel about that.
Zeke Berry played well in the spring. Seemed like a guy who flashed.
So like that's a big spot, but otherwise, like I don't know, maybe they're 1 fewer deep at defensive tackle. But I think their front's going to be awesome. Like it's much less a question of personnel for me than it is how does Wink Martindale, their new defensive coordinator, who they brought in from the NFL, who hasn't coached in college in like 20 plus years or something like that. Like,
yes,
how does that work? Because I think they have dudes. And as long as Wink Martindale knows how to coordinate a college defense, then I think they will be one of the best defenses in the country.
Again, as we talked, they really just played a lot of guys last year. They played 19 guys on defense who played between 684 and 244 snaps. Now, that's a big gap. 684 to 244. But if you're playing like 250 snaps, that's a decent amount of experience there. There are some guys they're filling in the secondary. Jair Hill played 56 snaps last year. Zeke Berry, who we talked about, played 42 snaps last year. So there are some guys that are really asking to do something that haven't done much. But of the 19 guys on the Michigan defense a year ago who played at least 244 snaps, 8 are gone to the NFL or just gone. 1 is out with the season-ending injury, and 10 are back. So that's like, and again, and there's a top elite group. And I think when you think about this matchup, you think about the Michigan strength being the interior of that defensive line. And now we are thinking about Donovan Jackson, Seth McLaughlin, and whoever the right guard is for Ohio State holding up against Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant. And we saw what happened last year when your interior offensive line doesn't hold up at key moments. That's probably the matchup that Ohio State would have the most concern about at the moment.
Yeah, I would think so. But the thing about that game last year, too, is like it's definitely there were times where that crept up and was an issue for Ohio State, but it wasn't like a persistent issue throughout the game. Like that drive Ohio State had in the third quarter when they just ran it down Michigan's throat for like 12 straight plays. It's like, oh, I don't know where that came from. So it wasn't like they were losing those battles every single down, but yeah, that does feel almost where the game will be determined again this year. I think is how Michigan's front handle or how Ohio State's front handles Michigan's. Because otherwise, like I don't know, like I see kind of like advantages for Ohio State almost everywhere else.
Yeah, I mean, people are going to be talking about Will Johnson all year, just so people understand this. People are going to talk about Will Johnson as a potential top 5 pick as maybe the best corner in the country. So when you're talking about Emeka Buka and Carnell Tate and Jeremiah Smith, it's like, well, who can guard them? Well, maybe nobody. But who has a shot? Well, Will Johnson can maybe at least try to take one of those guys away. And we saw last year, Benjamin Morrison at Notre Dame did as good of a job on Marvin Harrison Jr. as anybody in the country. It doesn't mean that Ohio State couldn't function, and it opened up Emeka Buka, and that, was a way that worked. But they'll at least have a better shot against Ohio State receivers than many of the other people on Ohio State's schedule who are just going to look at Jeremiah Smith and walk off the field.
Yeah, I think that's true. But I also wonder, like, I think back to like the 2018 game when I think Michigan might have had like one good corner and Ohio State just threw to the other one.
Yeah.
And then they threw for 1 billion yards and scored 60 points.
Good strategy.
Yeah.
They got that Demario McCall, Devin Bush matchup. Eat that up. That might just be a thing. Like a guy like gets down, like press man, lines up, looks up. Oh man, that really showed them. My eyes looked weird when I did that. I looked up and I was like, I have one eye that functions and one that doesn't. Looks up and it's Jeremiah Smith. It's that berm photo of Jeremiah Smith. They're like, okay, who am I guarding? They look up and they walk off the field.
Just pass. Yeah, I'm good.
Out. All right. That's our little Ohio State Michigan breakdown. People watching and listening to that probably said to themselves, okay, it sounds like Ohio State's better. Yes? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a fair thing to walk away from this discussion with that idea.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. When we come back, we're going to talk about Ohio State and Michigan recruiting, and then we're going to get into beat Michigan or win the Natty, and we will tear each other apart from the inside out. Jeremy Birmingham will join us next on Kings of Columbus. Back on Kings of Columbus, we've added a king, Doug Lesmerises, Bill Landis, and Jeremy Birmingham. We're not the Kings. Why did I even say that? We're not the Kings. The players are the Kings. We just talk about them. We're going to talk about Ohio State, Michigan recruiting, Berm. And I want to go backwards a little bit first before we dig in on how Michigan is going about it right now, how Ohio State's doing in this class. But the way these rosters were built, it's just a reminder. Michigan's won 3 straight. That's undeniable. That's what matters. Nobody cares about recruiting rankings if you don't win on the field. But as we think about talent acquisition out of high school, Ohio State's still like quite a bit ahead. Let's run through them real quick, Mike. Ohio State's the 4 classes that built this roster. In the 247 composite rankings, the 2024 class was 3rd in the nation in average star rating. 2023, 3rd in the nation. 2022, 3rd in the nation. 2021, 2nd in the nation. Michigan, same 4 classes. 2024, 18th in the nation. 2023, 22nd. 2022, 13th. 2021, 13th. So you're thinking about basically an average of 3rd in the nation. That's behind like Alabama and Georgia. And you're thinking about an average of like 18th in the nation with Michigan. Berm, when you think about right now, the way Michigan has built this 2024 roster, what they had done to build the team the last 3 years that beat Ohio State, that won the national championship. What did you think about that recruiting from a Michigan standpoint as it was happening? Did you think like it was fine? Did you think it was smart and targeted? Did you think it was scattershot? How did they build these teams?
I mean, if I'm going to say this, and it's probably going to get some flack, but I think it was lucky. I think 2020 happened and completely reset the rivalry in a way that I don't think we ever really give enough credence to. Ohio State had a team full of guys that didn't really have any reason to ever worry about Michigan. You got 2 years off. Michigan completely retooled their roster. Ohio State lost a ton of guys to the NFL. Michigan returned a bunch of guys, and then it was like 50-year seniors versus freshmen. And I think that you see when you're playing a bunch of grown men versus, teenagers, you see a difference in physicality and a difference in style. And clearly that was intentional on Jim Harbaugh's part to make sure that they were a more physical team. But as far as their recruiting goes, I mean, Michigan believes firmly in the fact that they can develop from within. They've done a great job with that. The last couple of classes have been, I mean, if we're calling a spade, their classes have been extremely underwhelming considering their success on the field. And I have to think that's on purpose. I don't know why. I don't really understand how it could be anything other than them deciding like, hey, we're going to focus on a skill set, a body type, and then develop them as opposed to a star ranking, which I think is fair. I mean, they obviously trust their development, and Ben Herbert, their strength coach, had done an incredible job. So I think that's the biggest change that we'll see from them now is like what happens in their development with everyone that they had involved in that space gone.
Do we? This was like a conversation. I think we saw it a little bit when D'Antonio had it going at Michigan State. I think we clearly saw it with Dabo Swinney at Clemson, that sometimes you start to have more success on the field and then you can recruit to a higher level. And you're saying, Berm, like you didn't necessarily see that correlation of like, oh, hey, like Michigan's pretty good at this now. Why aren't they bringing in more higher? You were surprised by that? Or you thought, okay.
I mean, if you look at the 20, I mean, we'll jump around here, obviously, because that's what we do. But if you look at the 2025,
that's actually not what we do. We're very targeted and specific. We're looking for a certain body type on this show, Berm.
Yeah, I must
not
be watching a different show.
Stars.
Like in the class of 2025, and this is obviously the current recruiting cycle. Michigan is 4 months away from removed from winning a national championship. They've offered 311 players in the class of 2025, which is insane. Oh, that's double what Ohio State has offered in the class. And they have 5 commitments. And it's a group that is pretty good, all things considered, but it is extremely underwhelming when you consider how that championship it wasn't out of the blue. I mean, this was something they'd been building towards for the last 3 years. So you would have figured that you'd start to see an accumulation of talent, but it doesn't seem like that's happening. And they're still relying heavily on the transfer. I mean, here we are, it's May. They're trying to find a starting safety in Jaden Mangham in the transfer portal. So it is a little bit weird. And I know some of that's because you lose the head coach and there's the looming specter of the NCAA and what they're going to do. But if you think about where that program should be, compare it. I haven't done the research, and I'm sure it may be something that's other people will be interested in. But if you look at Clemson 2013, I think is a good example of that. Like Clemson, they started right. Ohio State allowed Clemson to start becoming a national treasure by when they beat Ohio State in the Orange Bowl, and then we saw what happened over the next couple of years. Michigan, like this is a program that you would expect would be recruiting in the top 5 every single year at this point, but they're just not. And I don't know why. Again, I wonder if it's intentional because they feel like their NIL is still behind and they're not wanting to lean on that because you end up spending your time and your resources on players that are going to go elsewhere and you're better off just, the grass is greenest where you water it type of thing. But it just feels like something is missing.
Bill, do you think Michigan almost prides itself on not recruiting at the very top of the sport when it comes to star rankings and then creating an underdog mentality where they overachieve based on their recruiting ranking, that they savor that? They want to create that world?
Yes, I think Michigan prides itself on a lot of things, and that is one of them. Yeah, I think I actually wonder like what the recruiting ceiling for a program like Michigan is, and it should be comfortably, I think, in the top 10, just given like its brand. But maybe there's not an appetite there for doing the things you need to do to recruit at that level in today's college football. So if that's the case, then yeah, you almost like recruit to a culture, and it's like, what's your culture? Well, we take worse players. Like that's probably not like a compelling sales pitch necessarily. But I do think there is a mentality probably that they look for that tends to reveal itself maybe not so much at the top end of recruiting classes.
I also just think it's that idea is somewhat overblown. Michigan's best players in the last 5, 6, 7 years have been their highest rated recruits. It's not really that. I mean, JJ McCarthy was extremely highly ranked. Aiden Hutchinson was extremely highly ranked. Daxton Hill was extremely highly ranked.
Will Johnson, Mason Graham, they're highly ranked.
These are really good players. And so this idea or notion that they haven't recruited good players is folly. What they've done is recruit 4 or 5 really good players, and then they supplement them with really good transfers and really smart use of the transfer portal, where they're bringing in established players and starters. And then again, you throw that into the mix with the fact that their schedule has been absolutely dog water the last 3 years. Like it has opened, and that's not to take away what they did against Ohio State. Like they beat Ohio State physically up front in 21 and 23. I think 2022 was a whatever. We don't need to break into what all happened there, but they've done a good job, and they just don't get the depth of talent in recruiting that we've seen Ohio State or Georgia or Alabama do. And that's why when you look at the 2025 team, you see, oh my gosh, we have to replace 10 offensive players, starters. And I don't know that there's anyone that you look at and you're like scared of that guy on offense and that's not the case at Ohio State or Georgia or anywhere else.
When I mentioned Michigan State and Clemson, it maybe feel like when those programs had more success and then upped their recruiting from a ratings perspective, that they did lose their way a little bit? Is it possible that all the things that we are saying are true, but that Michigan's best strategy going forward is to continue to recruit exactly the same way that they have recruited? We did talk about earlier, Berm, the idea that they've been very targeted and smart in the portal, and they do not seem as targeted or productive in the portal this offseason. That seems like something they're going to have to continue to do down the line. But would you suggest, Berm, that something in their recruiting with Sherrone more now should change and be different than what it's been? Or if this has worked, keep doing this?
I mean, I think you keep doing what has worked. I think that you have to be on high alert that what you had been doing may not continue to work, however, because it's different people. It's a different mindset. It's a different approach. It's not a guy in Jim Harbaugh who's coached in the Super Bowl. Like, I mean, we can all make fun of Jim Harbaugh for all of his idiosyncrasies and eccentricities and every other thing about him, but the guy is a winning football coach and has done it for a long, long time. I think that they put themselves in a very, very precarious position. And I understand Sherrone Moore beat Penn State and beat Ohio State and won the, ostensibly helped Michigan win the national championship. I think to turn over that program right now in the place that they're at to a guy who's never been a full-time head coach is extremely risky. And I thought it in January, and I still think it now. I don't know that it is as easy a sell as people think it is. And I understand that people will try to draw the parallels between Ohio State, who turning over the football program to Ryan Day, a first-time head coach.
We just drew those parallels for 20 minutes before you got here.
I don't know.
They're all wrong. Herm says they're all wrong.
I think they are wrong. And I think, especially Clemson, like I think there's more of a parallel to draw to Clemson in the Dabo / Brett Venables era, because Brett Venables was cheating and everyone knew it. And Ryan Day found a way around that. And then Clemson dropped dramatically once Venables was gone, because that part of their process was removed. And I don't know exactly how much of Michigan's process remains. And that's what I'm interested in, because the process is how you win.
We're back again talking Ohio State, Michigan recruiting with Jeremy Birmingham.
Michigan recruits good players, Doug. That's the point. They recruit good players.
They do. I mean, I tried to they do. They don't recruit as many good players. It feels like what you're saying is like they have the cream's on top and the skim milk's on the bottom. They have their cream layer is not as thick as Ohio State's cream layer. Ohio State, like in a bucket, like it's like 80% cream. It's not that Michigan has no cream. They have some cream. They don't have as much cream, but the cream is still good and the cream is still tasty. And so I'll stop.
What you're saying is
please keep going with that.
No, this is important
It's
because
over.
what you're saying is correct. You don't order your drink for the cream. Okay. The cream is not what the drink is. The cream is, and I think Ohio State in the last few years has been noticeably absent in the actual drink because
Creamy,
Michigan has the drink. And Michigan has had, right. They have had the base. They have, and the base is the offensive and defensive lines where they've recruited very well and they've developed very well. And Ohio State has struggled in those two areas. So I think that's where you see the success of Michigan on the field. It's certainly not been that they've been more skilled than Ohio State. They've just been better at the point of attack. And I wonder how much of that changes with the loss of Ben Herbert and Jim Harbaugh's overall philosophy. Now I know Sherrone Moore is all smash and all that stuff, but how does that, I don't know. We talked about it when we were breaking down the Oregon recruiting and like it's the multiplicity problem. Like how much is a facsimile of a facsimile? How do you maintain what made it, special to begin with?
Can I ask about the Ohio cream? The cream in Ohio. The cream in Ohio.
Yeah.
Last year, Michigan really pounded its chest, but because it landed a couple of offensive linemen that Ohio State didn't offer, which I found funny. In the head-to-head battles, I think Ohio, of the players in Ohio that both programs offered, I think the only one Michigan got was Jordan Marshall, right?
Yes.
Do you see that dynamic in the state being any different than it's been the last couple of years with Sherrone Moore? Like, are they going to be more aggressive in Ohio? Could they perhaps win more in Ohio? Or is it always going to be Ohio State kind of gets who it wants by and large, even if it's recruiting against Michigan?
They've stayed aggressive in Ohio. I mean, again, they've offered 311 players in the class of 2025, which is pretty much every player in the country. So if you look at Ohio in general, they've been pretty active. They are trying pretty hard with Trey McNutt, but they're not going to get him. Like he's going to end up at Oregon or Ohio State or Texas A&M, or he's not going to go to Michigan. What you are seeing with the Jordan Marshall thing was Ohio State was late getting in on Jordan Marshall. And bottom line, that's what ended up costing them. He was Ohio's Mr. Football, big time player. The Buckeyes replaced him with two running backs. At the time they had two running backs that were ranked higher than him and Jordan Lyle and James Peoples. But these are the discussions that you're going to have that, hey, how much does we value in-state versus out of state, blah, blah, blah. With Jordan Marshall, Ohio State was just late. There were people in the program who were saying, hey, we need to go recruit this guy a lot harder. It didn't really happen until like October or November of his junior season. And by that point, it was pretty much Michigan with an insurmountable lead, and Ohio State tried to get back in it and couldn't. If you look at this cycle, for example, like Marquise Davis is the one that I think is most interesting to people from Cleveland Heights, running back, who Michigan really believed that they had the beat on. They felt like this guy was going to end up in their class because of his existing relationship with Tony Alford from when Alford was recruiting at Ohio State, and he ends up committing to Kentucky last week. So I don't know that it matters. I just think that the simple truth is there's going to be the kids. Carter Smith, the quarterback committed to Michigan in class of 2025, is from Florida. Like he, to me, he's like a JJ McCarthy clone. So if you can get a kid like that and he comes in with the same chip on his shoulder and he has all of the same moxie and all, he's got a lot of similar talents. Like Michigan still recruits those, I don't want to say weird, but like kids who are just wired a little bit different. They're wired a little bit different. Most kids right now are interested in the schools that are best combining NIL and football. And Michigan is not one of those schools right now. So they are going to have to get better at that. Clearly, they've done a great job on the football side. Their NIL, they continue to talk and say, hey, it's going to get better. We're figuring it out. And once that happens, I imagine you'll see their recruiting shoot back through the roof because their success on the field warrants it. But that just doesn't matter to the average kid right now.
Mike, let's show the 2025 stats on where the Ohio State and Michigan classes rank right now. Ohio State 13 commits so far in the class of 2025, Michigan 5. Ohio State 3 5-stars, Michigan none. Ohio State with a 94.7 overall rating at the moment, tops in the country. Michigan 92.2, which is 9th in the country right now. Why do they only have 5 commits so far, Berm? I mean, this is always one of those things. As someone who is not as educated on the day-to-day nitty-gritty of college football, there are just times in the calendar, right? Well, you'll see some schools have recruits in the teens, and some schools have 4 or 5 recruits. Alabama always felt like a school, right, that is sort of like late to the party. It takes for, they build their class late. Is Michigan choosing to have only 5 commits right now compared to 13 for Ohio State, or is Michigan just not getting some guys that they would like to have in the class already?
Probably more B than A. I think what is also very interesting is I do believe, and I think this was the case for Marquise Davis, I think that there are a lot of kids around the country who are being told and are waiting for the other shoe to drop when it comes to the NCAA in Michigan before they really decide to get in the boat. If you look at the way that, and I think that's smart, we are in a world where we don't really know what the NCAA enforcement strategy is or if they have one. And so why, if you don't have to hurry, then don't. And most of these kids that Michigan is recruiting, that high level student athlete, the kids that have a lot of options, like they're not in a position where they're being forced to get in or you're out. And certainly Michigan is not going to take that approach with anyone because they're not in a position to have that sort of leverage. So you're going to find players. I mean, if you look at their current class, what they have, 2 kids from Michigan, which is probably low, but it's not exactly a super talented class of 2025 in Michigan. But the best player in the state is Bryce Underwood, who's committed to LSU at quarterback and number 1 player in the country by some people's measure. Then they've got Illinois, Florida, and Tennessee. Ohio State had offered Eli Owens, Michigan's Tennessee tight end commitment from Tennessee. It's more of an H-back type, so the Buckeyes really didn't push there because they had been focused on their tight end commitment, Nate Roberts. And then Avery Gatch, the offensive tackle guard who committed to Michigan last week. Like, that's the only players Ohio State was really going after in their class. So it is fascinating to me to see like the big boards, the high priority boards, and they just don't have a lot of interloping, intersectionality between Ohio State and Michigan's top targets. It's kind of been that way for the last decade, but I would think it would start to change now, and it just doesn't seem to, and I'm not sure why.
So, Bill, I want to ask a 2-pronged question here that are it's obviously related to each other. When Ryan Day took over for Urban Meyer, did you think Ohio State's recruiting would fall off? And now that Sherrone Moore has taken over for Jim Harbaugh, do you think Michigan will generally be less successful in recruiting because the guy can't say I coached in the Super Bowl?
I did think Ohio State's recruiting would fall off, and it hasn't. In fact, in some ways it's gotten better. And yeah, I do. I kind of think that Michigan's will fall off a little bit. Yes, because it's not Jim Harbaugh walking into your living room. I guess the possibility there is like Sherrone Moore's a younger guy and like maybe understands it a little more. And will be more aggressive. Weird. He's less strange. Yeah. So maybe that helps Michigan. Maybe that'll make them better. But I tend to think the program has a little less gravitas to it. And if it's not going to be aggressive with NIL, then I think those 2 things combined will lead to a little bit of a step back.
Yeah, I think they're just. I really think that a lot of people are just in a position where they're waiting to see what happens with the NCAA, and if that doesn't happen over the next 3-4 months. And then Michigan goes out and let's see if they beat Texas in week 1. Like, I think you'll see a takeoff. But I do think that there are a lot of kids in a holding pattern right now, just waiting to see, like, is there a real problem coming? I'm convinced that, and I say convinced with pun intended, that a major part of what Marquise Davis, the running back from Cleveland Heights, when he didn't pick Michigan, I firmly believe that it's because he's been hearing from staffs around the country, and maybe even the one he committed to, that there is a lot of hammers going to eventually be thrown toward Ann Arbor.
I like convinced Marrow. Yeah, I get it.
Oh yeah. Vince Marrow. He works at Kentucky. He's from Ohio. Berm, same question for you though. What did you think would happen with Ohio State's recruiting from Urban Meyer to Ryan Day, and what do you think overall will be the final answer of Michigan's recruiting from Jim Harbaugh to Sherrone Moore?
I did not think that Ohio State would fall off. I thought, and I think that I've always been a big believer in Ryan Day as just a person. I've felt that he embodied the best characteristics of Urban Meyer and the best characteristics of Jim Tressel. And I thought there's no reason those two things can't work together. I obviously, we've talked about it a lot in the last like 2 weeks, almost unintentionally on the podcast daily and other shows. Like the 2018 or 2017 class, which was great for Ohio State, was very top loaded. And then the 2018 class, which was an abysmal class result wise for Ohio State, did not leave Ryan Day in quite the position that we like maybe thought he was going to be left in when he took over. And I think it's taken him a little bit of time to right the ship a touch with the roster. And I think the Ohio State roster right now is better than it's been since 2015 at least. So maybe the 2017 Buckeyes or 2019, which is obviously his first year. So that class was loaded, or 2019 was loaded because of the 2017 class, but we didn't unfortunately get to see the best of that because 2020 happened the way it did. So I think that you're looking ahead at Michigan, and if the NCAA continues to abdicate its duty, then I don't see any reason that Michigan won't get better. I actually think they will get better at recruiting under Sherrone Moore because NIL is going to end up eventually in-house at all these schools. So even by default, they're going to improve there because they're not going to have to organize it separately. I do think that having a younger, more relatable head coach like Sherrone Moore and a coaching staff that is maybe more like personal and interpersonal. Michigan's like Jim Harbaugh is weird. Like, I don't know any other way to put it. He's a weird guy.
I've heard anyone say that before.
Yeah. Jim Harbaugh is a weird guy. And I think he actually attracts weird people to him. So there was a lot of weirdness on their staff. And they seem, to be a little bit more normal now. So we'll see. But I do think that they will actually improve. I think that we will see them once whatever the NCAA throws down, they'll find a way to bounce back from that anyway, because there's no real punishments anymore. So I think they're actually going to get better. And I think that will start once they get a ruling from the NCAA.
We go another 9 hours on this, but we'll stop here and say that we are going to come back and dive back into this game, the game this year, 2024. Bill, Berm, and I will make predictions on what percent chance does Ohio State have to win this game, and a couple other texter comments. We'll do all of that next on Kings of Columbus. Back on Kings of Columbus, Doug, Bill, and Berm. If you want to catch what you're watching, what you're eating, what you're thinking, Bill and I did that on the first Kings of the North this week, so you can go catch it there. We talked about the farmers markets and threesomes and just a bunch of different stuff. So got to go watch it to find out. That's a good tease. Not at farmers markets.
Can I recommend
farmers market?
I want to make sure people are eating these. These little caramel things with the cream and
Berm's going to be back on Kings of Columbus again next week, and we will do Whatcha on this show next week. So Berm can talk about delicious caramels. And really, what is that white stuff in the middle? What substance is that?
It's the cream.
It's the cream. We'll stack them up. Ohio State has this much. Oh, that is cream versus caramel. That's the Ohio State Michigan discussion in a nutshell. Let's talk about this game right now. We asked the texters, how are you feeling about the game at the moment? And the choices were, I'm worried and nervous, I'm eager and excited, I'm not thinking about it, or I'm just anticipating a good game that Ohio State has a good chance to win. I'm just, I'm not fired, I'm not like wound up about it, but it's going to be good. Eager and excited. Right? Eager and excited, almost 70%. Worried, nervous, 15%. Just think it's going to be a great game, 12%. And I'm not thinking about it, 5%. So just to be clear, it's May. 95% of the people who participate in this show are thinking about the game. Maybe that feels low. Thought it'd be 98%.
Yeah.
Bill, eager and excited. Is this is good? Ohio State fans should be eager and excited. I feel for the 15% who are like, oh God, 4 in a row. You shouldn't carry that through your summer vacation. But I'm glad we're nearly 7 out of 10 want to get to this game again.
I'm a little surprised that number is not higher, only because the confidence was higher. Like the confidence was almost an 8 out of 10, right?
That's correct.
And I think that confidence is like, we're going to smash them this year, right? Like they got us the last 3 years. We're the better team this year. We're going to smash them. So I'm eager and excited. To me, should almost be a little higher if that's the case. But I also get that like it's the Michigan game and nerves are always going to be there. So I bet like the 15% who are worried / nervous have a little bit of eager and excited in there too.
So, Berm, I saved this one for you because Thomas, the texter, sent it and said, I'm not feeling great about the game. I was born in 1981 and lived through the Cooper years. Berm would understand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the Cooper, the 1993 to 1998 ruined my life. So there's no world where, and I had this conversation with Austin for the last decade. Like, even when Ohio State was going to beat, when Ohio State was beating them by 50 points, like, it doesn't matter. Those games, 2013, I was nervous. Like, going into 2013, I was nervous. And guess what? 42-41. Like, Michigan didn't have any reason to be in the ballpark that day. Yet there's always nerve. It's never excitement. I'm sorry. It's not a game I've ever been excited for. It's always disgusting. It's gross. It ruined my life. I'm going to tell you guys a story. So it was 1996, Doug, 1996. Ohio State was playing Michigan at home. It was the first time I'd ever attended an Ohio State Michigan game. My girlfriend at the time was a freshman at Ohio State. I was a senior in high school, and I had gone down there to spend the weekend with her and to watch the game. My brother Bobby went down with me. We drove down on Saturday morning. I was going to come back like Tuesday. That's the day that Sean Springs slipped and Ohio State lost 13-9. I left after the game and went home. I did not stay in Columbus because I just simply couldn't do it. I couldn't bring myself to do it. That game and living through it in the 1990s will fundamentally change the way you view it. Should fundamentally change the way anyone who experienced it views the rivalry. And that's why for the last 20 years, people are like, oh, Ohio State can't lose Michigan. Like, you just don't say that. You don't know what you're asking for. The idiots who say, well, I want the rivalry to be good. I want both teams to be good. That's the dumbest thing that anyone can ever say. It's so stupid. You don't want your rival to be successful in anything. I want them to lose in badminton. I want that, that's the way it works. I don't care what it is. The people who are like, oh, let's have both teams be good. Like, no, that's dumb. The better your rival is, the more likely it is that they're going to beat you. Why would you want them to have a better chance of beating you? I want them to be terrible. I want my rival to be terrible in everything. Chess, losers, badminton, get out of here. I don't care if it's croquet. I don't care if it's, you don't know, they feed their dog 15 minutes too late every day. I don't care what it is. I want them to be worse at it than me.
Can I ask what?
Yes, I understand.
You left the weekend early when you're supposed to be there with your girlfriend. How much longer did the relationship last after that?
Roughly 3 weeks.
Okay.
Nice.
So
right before Christmas.
Yeah.
I thought maybe she'd respect your dedication to the game, but
turns out she did not.
Turns out she did not. So that sounds like a vote for worried and nervous for Berm in the poll. Do you think we are making little Berms the last 3 years in the Ohio State fan base with what has happened? It's not 2-10-1 yet, but it's been a rough 3-year period. Do you think there's some high school kid who left campus after the game in 2022?
Probably. And I hope so, because it was way too easy for people growing up in the mid 2000s and early.
They ruined your life, and now you want other people's lives to be ruined so that they can appreciate things.
Doug, have you ever heard the expression, good times make weak men make bad times make strong men make good times make, like, we've had good times and we've got weak men. Okay.
Wow. I did not know what this was getting into. Did you?
So that thing going around like that's a Taylor Swift lyric. You wouldn't last an hour in the asylum where they raised me. I like the idea of Berm tweeting that with just a picture of John Cooper.
It's probably. I mean, we are fortunate in our jobs to be able to be around the Woody Hayes Athletic Center, and like I can't believe like growing up how I did and growing up as inundated in the rivalry as I was, that I am able to like sit in the team room at Ohio State and talk to the coaches. And I've been fortunate to build great relationships with everyone in that building except for John Cooper. I can't bring myself to try to befriend him.
I thought you could say, I can't believe I sit in the same room as John Cooper and I don't dive across the chairs and try to strangle him.
I've never tried to befriend him, and it's not like an intentional thing. I just like, there is a simmering animosity that I will never be able to extinguish.
Okay, let's keep talking about football, I guess. Wow. Would you rather beat Michigan or would you rather win the national title? I'm afraid to go into this discussion. It is a similar discussion that we have had a million times, except Bill, it's substantially more real now because the whole point, Ohio State became Ohio State, Michigan, because first of all, the national championship didn't matter as much because it was fake. It was a bunch of drunk guys sitting in their house writing a name on a ballot on New Year's Day. But also, like,
that, by the way,
as formerly one of those drunk guys, no, we shouldn't. But the idea of like you had to go through each other to have a chance at it. So like it was the same thing. It's not the same thing anymore. There absolutely is going to be a world in a 12-team playoff where the loser of the Ohio State-Michigan game, as long as they had a good season the rest of the year, will make the playoff and have a chance to win a national championship. So it's the same old discussion, but it really is a brand new discussion. And so I asked the tech subscribers, would you rather, and I tried to phrase it this way, would you rather have Ohio State beat Michigan and then Ohio State in the playoff, maybe in a semifinal or a championship game, like they play well and it's like a Georgia game, right? Like it's not that they tank it. It's not that Michigan wins the national title. It's just that Ohio State doesn't. Would you rather have that? Or would you rather have Ohio State lose to Michigan and then win the national title? And people like don't want to answer this. Like there's part of them that like I don't even want to deal with this idea. Our guy Thomas, I hate the choice between beating them and winning a natty. But the people who did make the choice, it's about split. But it is a slight edge to beating Michigan and not winning the national title, 52%. Versus losing to Michigan and winning the national title, 48%. Bill, what do you think of this discussion?
It feels like a little bit of a moving target to me. And I think my opinion has changed on this too. Like when I first started covering Ohio State, and granted the dynamics were different kind of all around, both at the playoff and like how good Michigan was. But it always like seemed kind of crazy to me that anyone would say like, I'd rather beat Michigan than win the national championship. And then I covered 3 straight losses. So I am now on beat Michigan before anything else. Like I get why you're torn. I like 50-50. I'm actually a little surprised it's 50-50, but it mostly makes sense to me. But my mind has changed on this. Because I just seen what it does to people. I've talked to Berm. I think mostly is what's happened. So I am in the camp of win with no title. That's what I would choose.
I think I know where Berm is going to land here.
I don't know if you do. See, here's the thing. What the 90s, why they hurt so bad for people was because losing to Michigan eliminated the chance to win a national championship. And I think if you went back into the 90s, and let's go back to 96, for example, Ohio State was, I'm not sure that it was really even arguable that they were the best team in the country. 1998, obviously Ohio State beats Michigan, but they lose they don't get a chance to win the national championship with clear cut the best team in the country because they lost to Michigan State. The Michigan State loss in 98 was more damaging psychologically than any of those Michigan losses. So I actually think that if it came down to it, Ohio State winning a national championship would mitigate the impact of a loss to Michigan significantly enough that I would choose that. Now,
Really?
that being the case, I do think you're going to have to play them twice, pretty much any one of these years to win a national championship. So, like there might be a way to all these things to be answered into one riddle, like beat them, lose to them, win the national championship. If you beat them in the regular season, lose in the Big Ten championship game if there is still one, and then national title. I think that's dream scenario, but like I think if it was the question was asked this way, like, would you rather beat Michigan and lose the national championship so long as Michigan doesn't win the national championship?
Yeah, that's what it was. Michigan doesn't win it.
Then yeah, I'd rather have that.
Really? You said losing to Michigan ruined your life. I really thought, because I will say, I actually, in this tiny window of time, I think I agree with Bill and our texter Steve, who said normally I would choose a national title with the Michigan loss in that Hobbesian choice, but not this year. We have to have revenge.
Yeah,
another loss, especially
right.
in the shoe, would be devastating. With this year's loaded team, let me finish. With this year's loaded team, I will be disappointed with anything less than a victory over Michigan and a title. So that that's where everybody is, right? With this year's loaded team. But I think I would agree with the idea, Berm, of this year in this circumstance, which is why I don't think Ohio State's national title or bust this season. I don't like that version of a discussion because only one team wins a national title. It doesn't mean that every other team's a failure if you don't win the national title. But I think they might beat Michigan or bust this year. So I think this year in this circumstance, I would think beat Michigan first and then anything else is gravy. But that somehow a national title with a Michigan loss would leave, because then you get to the Michigan game the next year to be 4 in a row. So I think I pick Michigan.
Yeah, I think this year is a unique situation that marries the worst of all these problems. So here's the thing. In my lifetime, 1998, Ohio State was clearly the best team in the country and would have won a national championship had they not lost to Michigan State. 2015, Ohio State loses to Michigan State, clearly the best team in the country, would have won a national championship had they been allowed to play in the playoff. They beat Michigan in 98. They beat Michigan in 2015. They beat Michigan in 2019, where the Buckeyes had a game ripped away from them against Clemson, where maybe they wouldn't have won the national championship against LSU that year, but it sure would have been an incredible game to watch. So the three best Ohio State teams in my life all beat Michigan and didn't win a national championship. And those 3 seasons are just drilled into my brain as 3 of the most disappointing ends to a season as a fan that I can remember. So like, I don't know that I'm willing to expunge the Michigan win and say, oh, okay, who cares if you win that one, if you win the national title. But I think about the 90s, and those losses to Michigan were revelatory. They're like, okay, well, maybe the Buckeyes weren't as good as we thought they were because they got their doors blown off by a mediocre Michigan team a bunch of times in a row. The teams that beat Michigan and didn't win the national championship by other crazy circumstances, like a punt hitting a return guy and Michigan State recovering it in 1998, or the crap that happened in the Clemson Fiesta Bowl with the Jeff Okudah fumble, and like those things bother me more long term, because when you look at the list of national championships, it's missing 3 of them that should have been there, and I don't know that you can get over that as easy.
But the reason you can't talk to John Cooper isn't because he doesn't have a national championship. It's because he's 2-10-1 against Michigan.
Well, but had he won a national championship in 1998, it'd sure be a lot easier.
Okay.
You know, I do think that this year is unique.
Not the Michigan thing, Coop. It's 98. It's 98 why Birmingham can't talk to you.
I do think that this year is, like I said, I think it's the worst of all these things, because this is one of those Ohio State teams that has the talent, top end to bottom, to be considered in that 98, 2015, 2019 vein. And then you throw that on top of it, like, oh crap. And if they don't beat Michigan, what then? So I think that it's actually, that's why, like, it kind of for me as a person who grew up as a fan in the 90s, like, it is national championship or bust this year because of that very reason. Like, you can't have another one of these all-time great teams and fall short of the goals.
But I do think, Bill, that the idea of they beat Michigan and then you just, you play a banger against Oregon in a semifinal, or Georgia, or Texas. Like, those are the four, we think those are the four best teams in the country. Like, it's going to be hard to win 3 or 4 playoff games. This is the new world. Like, Georgia's kind of like a mini dynasty here. To me, at the moment, if you told me the Ohio State season ended with a Michigan win, let's say that then leads to a Big Ten championship, but that's not part. But it's bottom line, it's a Michigan win, and then they play a good game and lose to a good team in a semifinal or a championship. I think Ohio State fans would feel okay about that going into the offseason. You lost to a good team, but at least the Michigan losing streak was ended. And that's a version of success. I will never, for any team, I'm just not going to live in a world of championship or bust when there's 134 Division I teams and it's a 12-team playoff and some crazy stuff can happen. So that's why I would pick to beat Michigan.
I think I'm still with you. There's 2 things I want to say. Like, one, I think what you said is, like, true generally, but in the context of Ohio State, like, never being quite able to get it done with its best teams, with Birmingham just kind of laid out, like, maybe that changes the dynamic a little bit. So, like, I would understand why you wouldn't be the case, why you wouldn't think that way. Which is to lead to my other point, which is, like, I used to think there was a wrong answer to this question, and now I don't. Like, I used to think like believe pretty strongly that there was a wrong answer to this question, and now I believe pretty strongly that there's not, because it's just so nuanced, man. There's so much emotion involved in it. Like, I wouldn't begin to tell somebody whether or not they're right or wrong, depending on what side of the question they land on with this.
I know Denzel Burke said natty or bust. Why did those guys stay? Did those guys stay to win a national championship, or did those guys stay because they don't have any pairs of gold pants for beating Michigan?
Because they're 0 for 9 in all their goals in the last couple of years. And that includes Michigan and national championship. And so, like, I do think, Doug, in the situation that you're laying out, like, sure, you beat Michigan, you lose in a national championship to a good team. It makes it easier to swallow that difficult loss if you have all the other goals checked off. But I think Ohio State fans would just love one time for Ohio State to beat Michigan and then get to play TCU in a national championship game, or get to play a crappy Washington team that couldn't stop anybody. Like, I think instead it ends up in the psyche of the Ohio State fan in the last 25 years, it always just seems to break bad. And I think as a fan base, despite all of the success, despite all of the accolades and in the Big Ten championships and the first round draft picks and all the other things, like, one time it'd be nice if it just didn't break bad for Ohio State. If Shaun Wade doesn't get kicked out of a game for some stupid ass reason, if the official understands that T. Higgins took 3 steps with the football and then put it on the turf, and Jeff Okudah then just had a touchdown for some reason taken away from him. If the wind isn't blowing 60 miles an hour in sideways rain on a night in 2015 where Ezekiel Elliott has a stupid leg infection that it forced him to miss all week and he only had 12 carries. There's just always these weird little things that just go weird. Okay. And I just want, for the sake of everyone out there in Buckeye Nation, a nice, smooth
17-0.
17-0 and just dominate people and not have to worry about all the other weird crap. Yeah, it's great. You know what? The thing that Georgia game in 2021, like, why did it have to happen that way? You know, like,
the therapy session. I'm charging you for this show. I am charging a fee for this.
It didn't have to happen that way. Like, we should be talking about this from this perspective. Remember a couple of years ago when Ohio State lost to Michigan and still won a national championship? Like, that's the way it should have been. Instead, it's, remember when they tried a 50-yard field goal for some reason? And remember when they did that against the undisputed best team in the country without their top 3 running backs and their top tight end and Marvin Harrison getting knocked out, and the fact that the officials didn't give them the ball at the 2-yard line when Marvin Harrison got knocked out, which would have led to a touchdown instead of another field goal attempt. Like, there's just a ton of things where you can look at it and go, it didn't have to happen that way. All the other things that happened in that Georgia game could have still transpired. And if the officials call targeting, the Buckeyes still score a touchdown there and win the game.
They'd lost the national championship game in 2002, and then a guy threw a flag after the game was over. So that was helpful, right? And then in 14,
didn't call a flag.
Alabama.
Didn't call a flag.
Can you just take the thing? Can you take the thing that happened?
I can't. Number one, that Miami
it's
team
not
was the best.
Only misery.
The Miami team was the best team in college football history, and Ohio State wouldn't have had to be in that position if they would have called defensive holding in the fourth quarter when Chris Gamble was clearly held, when Michael Jenkins was clearly held on the sideline.
Only bad things. Only bad. Alabama played a linebacker at quarterback in 2014, and Lane Kiffin forgot that Derrick Henry existed.
And Ohio State was down to their 3rd string quarterback.
No, they did a miraculous thing, and people think they should have even gotten to the playoff to begin with.
Austin doesn't know why I love Lane Kiffin, but now you do.
Some good. There's been some good.
Austin never understands why I love Lane Kiffin, but I remember that, and him refusing to give the ball to Derrick Henry is the reason I love Lane Kiffin.
I just want Ohio State fans to enjoy their team, and Berm is like, I'm here with my list of grievances. Nothing ever goes right.
It's the May Festivus.
So let's talk about what we think is going to happen this year. This is a 9.5-point spread. A year ago at this time, it was a 1-point spread in this game. So that's the difference between it being in Ann Arbor and being in Columbus, but also it's the difference in how these teams are viewed right now. The over-under is 47.5. So if we're thinking about an actual football score here, Bill, like a 10-point spread, basically 47.5. I mean, we're looking at like a 28, 20, 30 to 17 kind of range of a game here. What do you think of this line being 9.5 right now, Bill?
I'm a little surprised it's that high. And I guess that's just part of the thing with Ohio State lines is Ohio State fans like to bet on Ohio State. So that always influences things. So this is what on a neutral field would be more like a touchdown game. That makes a little more sense to me, I think, and probably even a little tighter than that, to be honest. But I'm not Ohio State, I think, should be favored. Right? The game's in Columbus. I think Ohio State has the better roster, certainly less in flux, not really in flux at all compared to the transition that Michigan is going through. And the question we talked about early in the show about what state the two teams might be in by the time that game comes around. I think it's reasonable to assume Ohio State might be better positioned for that game. So a fairly large spread in Ohio State's favor, given how the last 3 games have gone, I think does make sense.
The other thing I want to throw in here, and again, there are just some early lines out on specific games. Ohio State is a 1.5-point underdog at Oregon.
Mm-hmm.
So home and away really matters in these two discussions, but it's also an indication of the way that Ohio State and Oregon and Michigan are viewed within context of each other. When you see basically a 10-point spread here, Berm, what do you think?
I mean, it's way too early to project, but my brain is saying a 24-13 Ohio State win. So I'm on board with that.
Yeah. Okay. So as we sit and think about here, then I want us to each just give a % chance that we think Ohio State has of winning this game. As we sit here and ponder, many moons ago, this was a way that I went through the entire Ohio State schedule, and I would come up just sort of with out of nowhere, I think Ohio State has a 91% chance to win. And then I would do that for every single game, and you multiply it and you come up with a 36% chance at an undefeated season or something like that. So Bill, what is your % on Ohio State has a what % of beating Michigan?
83.
Okay. That's pretty, does that feel high, or would you maybe even going higher and you pulled yourself back?
I pulled myself back from getting close to 90. I think I think Michigan has the top end talent that we laid out, no doubt about it. Top to bottom, Ohio State is unequivocally a better football team going into the season. So, and it's here in Columbus, right? So, I don't think I need much convincing to get close to 90, but I also want to be respectful of what's happened the last 3 years. So I pulled myself back a little bit.
So I'll say 75%, and we can talk this out then. Berm, what's your number?
75 is my number.
Okay. Berm, how much do you think the fact that Michigan has won 3 straight, that Ohio State has all these guys back, the pressure, whatever, that part of it, the intangible aspect of it, do you think the intangibles in a home game will work for Ohio State, or is there a world where they could potentially work against Ohio State in this game?
I think they worked against Ohio State in 2022 in a very similar situation. And I don't know. I guess we're counting on or banking on Ryan Day learning from that situation and having it not happen again. So I think the odds of that right now are Michigan's best chance at winning the game, to be honest. And I would say that that's still something I would worry about, like the emotions of things as it gets closer to that game. Like Ryan Day takes this stuff very personally, and obviously a lot of these guys have put off their professional futures for this opportunity, and you know, the tighter it gets to being the game, the tighter guys are going to get. So I actually think that's Michigan's best opportunity, is that those things will work against Ohio State.
Because I did think at times in the Harbaugh stuff, especially the revenge tour year for Michigan, I thought they really got in their own heads. Yes, Ohio State had a talent advantage, Bill, but I thought it reached the point until Michigan broke through, where the fact that they hadn't broke through and they were trying to like gear themselves up for it and was a real negative. And I don't think that will happen to Ohio State, but I think it could happen to Ohio State.
I think it could. The one changing dynamic here is, and I think it'll remain this way throughout the year, right? Like Ryan Day previously has had the straddle getting his guys ready emotionally and schematically. And he doesn't have to do the schematic part anymore, right? So I don't know enough about Ryan Day as a head coach to know whether or not that actually is like leaning into a strength of his. But it does create the dynamic where like I think he can channel a lot more of his energy to like making sure that his team is in the proper frame of mind for this game. So that could actually be an advantage for Ohio State. Maybe they weren't in the proper frame of mind in the previous years because their head coach seemed kind of distracted by all the things that were on his plate. And now theoretically that won't happen. So I think that could be a benefit for the Buckeyes going into this game, but certainly the emotions can work against them. We've seen it happen before.
Yeah, I wonder, not worry, if having 2 new key parts in Chip Kelly and Will Howard, ostensibly if he's the starting quarterback, which we think he will be, is a benefit for Ohio State, that they don't have guys. And I'll go back to what I said earlier about 2020. When you have guys that don't know you're supposed to lose on your team, I think that is a help. I think that's what saved Michigan in 2021, is that they had an entire roster flip of Ohio State having a bunch of guys that thought that they couldn't lose to Michigan, and a bunch of guys on Michigan who thought that didn't know they were supposed to lose to Ohio State. And I think that it worked out in their favor because they played with a major chip on their shoulder, but they also played extremely loose. So I think Chip Kelly, not having been through this already, goes into this with a much fresher perspective than Ryan Day probably would have. And I think that is a benefit for Ohio State.
And I do think when it relates to this game and this season, the Sherrone Moore Ryan Day comparisons, the one that matters the most is Sherrone Moore is new and Ryan Day has been through this now. And I do think, Berm, I am expecting for the season, and in particular for the Michigan game, as Bill just said, the best version of Ryan Day because of the mistakes he's learned from, because of the things he's taking off his plate so he can focus on the bigger things. And I think that Sherrone Moore probably is going to, even though he's already given up play calling in a way that it took Ryan Day a while to give up. And yes, he was the head coach for the game last year. When you haven't done this before and you haven't been head coach before, I do think it takes a little bit of time to learn. And Ryan Day has 5 years experience doing this compared to Sherrone Moore, that I think it's possible that shows up in this version of the game, Berm.
I agree. No need to argue about it. I agree.
Yeah. All right. 75, 83. I think people should walk away from this show feeling decent about that, Bill, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a decent amount of confidence here, and it's It's odd, I guess, given how things have transpired, but I don't think it's unfounded. I think there's sound football reasons to be confident in Ohio State to get this thing back on track.
I go into this year thinking similarly how I did in 2017 for on the Michigan side of things, which was if not then when? And if it's not this year for Ohio State, it gets pretty weird moving forward. So it took Michigan 4 more years after that 2017 loss. If it wasn't going to happen then when would it ever happen? So we'll see. I think Jim Harbaugh was the reason Michigan lost in 2016 against Ohio State in Ohio Stadium when Michigan was a better team. And I think that he psyched himself out a number of times. And I don't know that why it eventually switched for him, but the hope has to be that Ryan Day has learned in the same way that Harbaugh did after 5 years.
All right, that's it. We won't talk about the Ohio State-Michigan game until the week before. So this will tide you over. Well, we're going to talk about it a million times because I think that's maybe the most important point, Berm, the one you just made, that really Ohio State's geared up for this. It doesn't guarantee anything, but if this version of Ohio State doesn't beat Michigan, then what? When Michigan is resetting and Ohio State is back with everything that made them good last year practically, and they added. So that's why we're at 75, 75, and 83. And again, in a world where we didn't just watch with our own eyes the last 3 years happen, if you're really, really, really only doing football, which is kind of what you were saying, Bill, you get to like 92.5 on just the football with what Ohio State has and what Michigan's trying to patch.
Yeah, but then there's the emotional component, and
there's the emotions.
We
like talking about emotions. Yeah. All right. Thanks to our producer, Mike Urostowski, as always, for making us look good and sound good. You can go find us on Kings of the North twice a week. We're going to talk about future quarterback stuff on the second Kings of the North show this week, which means we're going to talk about 2025 Julian Sayin, Aaron Noland, where they fit into the context of what other teams are looking at for their quarterback futures. And we'll be back on Kings of Columbus next week with the plan to have a similar discussion like we've had with Oregon and Michigan about Georgia. And that means Berm will be back joining us as well. For now, he's Bill Landis. He's Jeremy Birmingham. I'm Doug Lesmerises, and that was Kings of Columbus.